Roundtable Osteuropa. Ein Podcast des Zentrums für Osteuropa und internationale Studien.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Julia Langbein. I'm a senior researcher at the Center for East European and International Studies at ZOiS here in Berlin. And I also head the research cluster Political Economy and Integration at ZOiS. And it's really a pleasure to welcome Tymofii Brik today here. In these times, it's really a rare opportunity to meet with you in person. And that's why we would like to thank you very much for your interest to coming to ZOiS and taking this opportunity and for joining us today for a presentation on building resilience, priorities for Ukrainian science and education recovery. We organized this event rather spontaneously, and we were not sure how many people would actually make it to ZOiS on a Friday afternoon, because, the advance notice was really so short. But that's why we decided to record the event as a new episode of our ZOiS podcast, Roundtable Osteuropa. And so for the audience who's listening to us, I will briefly introduce Tymofii Brik. Tymofii is the rector of the Kiev School of Economics since 2022. And he has been working at the Kiev School of Economics since 2018. And over the years, he held various positions, for example, the head of sociological research at the KSE Institute and the vice president for international relations. And since 2018, Tymofii has also been teaching and conducting research in the field of sociology of religion, social research methods, network analysis, identity, and more recently, also on Ukraine's decentralization reform and how it shapes Ukraine's resilience to Russia's full-scale invasion. And today, Tymofii will talk about the challenges Ukrainian science and education faces in the context of Russia's war against Ukraine. He will talk about strategic opportunities and capabilities for Ukrainian science and education, and discuss also both strategic but also practical aspects that need to become a priority in the recovery plan, not least because science and education are, of course, also pivotal in propelling economic development and prosperity. So, Tymofii, please take 20 minutes for your talk. And since we are recording a podcast, I will then ask 2 or 3 questions, and then we will stop recording, but we'll have another, 30 minutes or so for a round of questions from the audience. Tymofii, the floor is yours.
Wow. Thank you so much for coming. Indeed, that due to the circumstances, due to the war and the martial law, it is very difficult for males to travel. So that's why my colleagues and I will have to be very selective and strategic in choosing where to go, whom to meet. So it is my way of saying that it is very important for me to be here. And it's a pleasure to be with ZOiS. I want to say thank you for everything you have been doing to support Ukrainian researchers, scholars, Ukrainian institutions, and for all the awareness that you raised to support Ukraine. So thank you so much. And the reason why I was traveling through Europe is that I had a goal to have few meetings with European bureaucrats, rectors, presidents of universities, and members of American Academy of Science and private foundations to discuss the future of Ukrainian science and how the world can join to support Ukrainian science. And I can share my reflections after these meetings, and I can also speak about some challenges and share my experience in what I think works and what doesn't work so efficiently in building research and education during the war in Ukraine. First of all, I have to share, it is a bit emotional observation, but I want to say it, that I see a lot of evolution and positive change for the past 2 years. When the invasion started 2 years ago, and myself and my colleagues, we were talking to international partners, trying to raise awareness or trying to ask for help or channel resources that would support Ukrainian universities. It was very difficult to do. We had very few friends in Europe and United States, and my words will be not very diplomatic, but we met a lot of arrogance, intellectual arrogance. So basically, I felt like a child surrounded by adults, always tell me what can be done, what cannot be done, the way I should do things, and it was very difficult to fight, and and to convince other people to help us in a way that is Ukraine. And these are not anymore. And I've met so many people who are very sensitive, who are very careful, who do research in Ukraine, who understand Ukrainian context a lot, and try to coordinate between each other and try to understand who is a stakeholder in Ukraine and how to work with these stakeholders. So I just want to acknowledge this progress. And I think we really, have to take in mind this positive change, which also means that another challenge, a new challenge, I feel, will arise that Ukrainians will no longer have this discount. Because, in a way, I think it's also elephant in the room that a lot of things were in coordination with Ukrainian scholars and researchers. Quite often people were giving us discounts and we understand that you are overwhelmed or you cannot work well because there is war, you don't have resources. But I don't think this will be the case anymore. I think after these 2 years of collaboration and coordination, the stakes are higher and the expectations are higher. So it's the challenge that now Ukrainian stakeholders will have to reinforce their professionalism and capacity and to become better partners, because now Europe and the United States and Canada and Britain, they're ready to help, and now we must build capacity to absorb the help. So this is just the observation I really wanted to share because it's very fresh. It comes from the meetings that I had yesterday and this morning. What I feel is that, and I was also surprised and in a very positive way, and I really loved one of the citation that I heard these words from David Spiegel from Simon's Foundation, and he said this beautiful phrase that science works best at different scales. And it was his way of saying that it's time to be flexible and you can develop different projects to support depending on the circumstances. You can work with private universities, you can work with public universities, you can work with small groups, with large groups. You can spend 2,000 euros to support a postdoc, and you can spend $10 million to build a lab for a chemist. And I really loved hearing this readiness to be flexible and understanding that it's time to be flexible. You can move differently with different stakeholders. And finally, before I move to my ideas about what works, what doesn't work, my final observation is that there is this new way of being data-driven. I think, again, 2 years ago, it was very difficult to build dialogue and build plans because we didn't have data. Now, more and more data exists, and people read the data, they understand the data, and build policies based on the data. So some time ago, the paper was published in the Nature based on the survey of Ukrainian scholars. More than 2,000 Ukrainian scholars were surveyed, and this data was discussed, and it was evident, something which is obvious to many people in Ukraine became evident to many people outside of Ukraine, that most of Ukrainian scholars remain in Ukraine. So 80% of Ukrainian scholars remained in Ukraine, and those who left, they have difficulties with precarious contracts, which means that there is a understanding that most of help is needed inside of Ukraine. And this help is, again, my words are not very diplomatic, but this help is relatively cheap because the cost of working in Ukraine is not so high as cost in Europe. So you can solve a lot of things with small grants. And those people who are outside of Ukraine and have precarious contracts, this context influences decision-making of universities. European universities, they are not ready to commit with long-term contracts, but if they have partners in Ukraine, they're ready to talk about joint appointments. They're ready to share cost and build joint contracts with Ukrainian universities as long as they can identify and find a reliable Ukrainian university, which is a good news for us. Another survey was presented and discussed during my meetings by Julia Langbein. She participated in this Science at Risk survey. And I don't remember all the numbers by heart, but there was one very specific number that struck me. There were respondents who considered to come back to Ukraine. And the question was, I don't remember the exact numbers to the respondents, but the question was, what is your salary expectation? And most of the respondents, more than 60 respondents, said that it's like 2,000 euro once after taxes, which is, relatively fair. So people live in Europe, they have high living standards, high expectations. It's not easy to come back to Ukraine because you need to relocate your family. You have to think about the future of rebuilding the country, about the safety of your kids. And So there must be some salary and some premium which can cover the risks of coming back to Ukraine. And, 2,000 euro per month is not such a huge sum of money in the comparison with the other salaries in Europe. So it's a typical salary of a postdoc, but you can pay this salary to assistant professor and they will be ready to come back to Ukraine, which is, again, good news because now the donors, private and public, they have some figure in their mind and now they can fundraise and then now they can build budgets and think how to reallocate these budgets. There is still some stigma attached to Ukrainian public universities, but it seems that there is almost a consensus, and it's shared by Ukrainian, European, public and private institutions. So everyone kind of agree that there is this elephant in the room, that public universities, they don't have capacity, maybe sometimes experience. It's about managerial skills. It's about speaking English. It's about quality of research. So there is a kind of skepticism and stigma towards public universities. But on the other hand, everyone understands that there is no way you can avoid public institutions. So especially during the war, the government is important, the government is powerful, and you have to rebuild the country, which means that, you have to serve to the public through public institutions. So you have to work with public institutions. And I think there is appreciation of this. And most of the people I talk to understand this context and they work to cut some slack to public universities and, and work with them, even given the given stigma. And the same stigma goes with the private university. Private universities in Ukraine are often perceived like these enterprises that just sell diplomas. Yeah, they are not real universities in a sense, but there are a few that are good, of a very good quality. I would plug in my own university, but also Ukrainian Catholic University. There are some others that try to build this international global culture. American University in Kiev is a very recent university which tries to build up this new culture in Ukraine. So there are agents you can work with. And and there is a growing, it's not a consensus, it's rather a romanticized idea and a bit crazy idea, but I feel that people from different directions, from different groups are thinking about this crazy idea that there is a certain void. So everyone in our bubble understands that education is important and science is important. The future of human capital and the future of technology and democracy is in science, and we need to rebuild science in Ukraine. And there is a void for a global university in the region. So there is a region, and it just happened that, Higher School of Economics is out of the picture. Central European University is at risk and has, suffered from political pressure. People know little about, of course, there are excellent universities in Estonia and Tartu, but, they're not very visible always. So there is a strategic understanding that there is a void and someone has to build a very strong global institution. And the university, research institute, people don't really care about details. It's just this political idea, like ideological idea. We have to build a big, important institution in Ukraine, and this is the future. And that makes a lot of people enthusiastic and energetic. So when you sit with people in the room, with different decision makers, politicians, donors, it seems like this idea unifies people. And that's also what can keep people in Ukraine energized. This is an idea which is sketchy, which is attractive, that people want to follow. So how to get there? How to build an excellent university during the war with a country which has nothing but risks and a lack of capacity. So it's a big question. But I think we can break it down in small parts, just at least to start thinking about it. You have to break down it in small parts. So where do you start? And I think, at least the way, I see it and I discuss it with my colleagues back in Kiev. So key is to build centers of excellence. So you have to attract smart people. You have to attract talented people. They can be in the diaspora. They can be in Ukraine. They can be foreigners. Doesn't matter. You need to attract talent, bring them to Ukraine, and force them to work in Ukraine. So in the times of peace, when there is no war, how do you usually do it? You first find investor, you find some money, you have some commitments, then you have a committee, a selection committee, some open calls. You search for people, you interview people, and it takes ages, and then they come to Tartu, not to Kiev anyway. So it's a long process. But during the war, it's completely different. It's what I will say sounds paradoxical, but I think it's the only way. You first build center of excellence and then you bring people. It's what people say in America, you build the church and then people will follow. So you have to give people a place, or at least a feeling that there is a place where they can go to. And you can start with small things. You do a project, you have a workshop, you have one academic program or something like that. You have a few colleagues, you have small budget. You just show them that there is an opportunity. And some people will come and you start working with this some people. And this is already enough to build a center of excellence. And the second part of it would be to think about incentives and contracts. And, I just gave you this romantic idea, but the romantic idea has to be structured. Otherwise, it will not work. And the way you structure it through specific contracts, through specific promises, through salaries, and everything in Ukraine now is not specific. Yeah, there are many risks, but we kind of learn how to navigate in this risk. I can give you my own example of my colleagues. When I was hired by the Kyiv School of Economics in 2018, it was there were many risks as well. So basically, my contract was written in a way that even if everything collapses and even if the school is closed, I will still have money because I will have a project. So that's how my contract was framed. With some people, we kept joint dual affiliations. It's scary to come to Ukraine. Maybe you will lose everything. But if you keep your affiliation with University of Pittsburgh or Free University or whatever, and if it's allowed in your contract and you can spend a year in Kyiv or 2 years in Kyiv, it can be solved. And that's what we actually discussed in our meetings. And it seems that there is a agreeableness to these ideas. We discussed it with the University of Zurich, that they actually might design ETH special type of contracts for postdocs. So a postdoc, it can be enforced in a contract that you spent 1 year in ETH and 1 year in Kyiv, and there is money for that. So, you can actually draw this kind of incentives in a contract. And these kind of incentives were written in our project, Ukrainian Global University, when we were helping students to go outside of Ukraine, to get education somewhere abroad. And of course, it's more symbolic. It's not legally binding. We don't practice slavery. You cannot force people to come back to Ukraine. But it was written in all our memorandums and documents and everything. And that actually helped us to build a strategic relationship with international universities who are now acknowledging that brain drain is important and that they have to encourage students to come back. And it works now. Even during this admission campaign, we brought back a few students. So we first helped them to find a shelter in Prague, in Spain, and now they're coming back to us during the admission campaign. So that's the way you can structure this romantic idea, through building contracts, through finding money for very specific postdoc positions, professorship positions. You build centers of excellence, and from that you may, who knows, maybe even you can build a good university. And what, in my view, doesn't work so well, what kind of frameworks people have tried, but not all of them worked, or at least didn't work very efficiently. I believe there is still this habit or very organic way of looking at things through division between fields, like economics or math, physics, or history, and organizations, like public university or private university. And I was asked a lot of questions about that during my trip. Sort of people were asking me, so what do you do differently? So we should work with public university or with private university, or tell us about your scope so we do not overlap. We don't want to overlap. We want to allocate our resources efficiently. So tell us about the scopes. And I think this framework doesn't work very well. I think instead of dividing organizations between public and private, it's not very efficient in Ukraine. You just have to find a partner which is reliable and which can work with you on this specific project. And sometimes it's public, like Mohila Academy, or sometimes it's private, like Catholic University or KSC. It really depends on the ad hoc situation. And I think 2 years ago, big international organizations, donors, universities were not ready to allow ad hoc situations. Usually you work with the frameworks. But now I think more and more political agreement that maybe we have to be more specific and think about ad hoc opportunities. And on one project, we can work with public university, and another project, we can work with private university. It really depends on who has the capacity, who has the expertise, whom do you trust, who can execute legally the money you want to send to Ukraine, who can accept them. Sometimes it can be joint enterprises. Private universities are more flexible to receive money, but we can then spend this money on public universities. So it's like as subcontractors, there are so many different opportunities. And in my own view, I will sound a bit critical now, but I think, we have to address it. There was this massive project with the Ukrainian National Research Foundation, with international support from Swiss, from Poland, from United States of America. And there was a lot of discussions that apparently private universities were not able to submit proposals as main partners. As subcontractors, yes. So public university submits a proposal and then invites private university as a junior partner, something like that. But that's exactly the wrong way. It doesn't work in Ukraine like that, because private universities have more capacity and flexibility and managerial skills to apply to such big grants, to deploy projects, but then they can invite public groups from public universities as subcontractors. And in other way around, it doesn't work so efficiently. But to know that, you have to understand the local context, to talk to people and to figure it out first. And this is just one of the examples. And I think this example arises because of this outdated framework that there are public universities, private universities. Some projects work only for some universities, other projects work for other universities, but it's not true. You don't need to distinguish them anymore. And the same is about fields. Usually economists love to support economics, mathematicians love to support mathematics. But again, the field is not relevant. You should find a partner who can deploy whatever project, and they will figure it out. So this is my way to lobby Kyiv School of Economics. If you have projects in engineering, mathematics, medicine, we can do everything. But that's how things work in Ukraine now. You don't look into field, you look into organization with governance and with managerial capacity, and they will figure it out. Yeah, I understand we don't have much time. I will be happy to elaborate and answer your questions. I think I've raised main points already.
Thank you so much, Tymofii, for your insights and also your ideas. Maybe my first question is maybe right away a critical one. Sorry for that. But when you talk about the idea of creating, such a lighthouse project, an excellent university that kind of, maybe is kind of similar to what CEU has been doing in Hungary, now in Vienna, or the HSE in Moscow. Is this really a good idea? Or maybe I got you wrong, to really come up with a rather centralized approach of creating excellency in Ukraine? I mean, I understand, of course, it's appealing to have such a university, but are there also ideas to decentralize it and to have, even the HSE had a university in St. Petersburg, a kind of dépendance, right? Are you also thinking in this direction, or will the focus rather be on Kyiv?
I think the answer is scale, and the scale is not measured in do we need 10,000 students or 20,000 students. So the scale has to be enough to move the needle. Like you must have impact. In Ukraine, I think now, if you look into universities that make impact, that are relevant, like Catholic University, they have 2,000-3,000 students. Mohila Academy, 5,000-6,000 students. Our university doesn't have 1,000; we have 700. So if you put together these three, I would say, best universities, you have below 10,000, and this is enough to move the needle. This is enough to be relevant, to write policies, to help communities, to help governments, to educate people in physics, math, and economics. So I think we should aim for one university of this size, because it's important to signal that there is an organization in Ukraine which has high-level international standards and has enough of scale to move the needle. And if you can make at least this one university, I think it will have a profound difference in the whole region. Should it be in Kiev? Should it be in Lviv? Who cares? I care because I love Kiev, because I'm from Kiev, but it's not a political fight. It's not something that we have to, to fight about. So decentralization is also a matter not only of, supporting local communities, it's also a matter of security. Basically, if you talk to people from science, physics, from chemistry, material science, engineering, biology, the first question will be, why should we invest $10 million in this laboratory if tomorrow the rocket falls and, and the Russians will destroy it? So that's why some distribution will be there by design. So the university can be in Kiev, but the laboratory is in Ivano-Frankivsk in the mountains, or just like Sumy State University operates in Sumy, but some medical faculty is in Western Ukraine because it's more safe. So in a sense, decentralization will be there for sure for security reasons, but centralization matters because we need to show that there is a, strong department that can move the needle. If you, this is a citation from Tymofii Brik, who is president of KC. He always says that the budget of his Department of Economics in University of Pittsburgh is larger than total budgets of UKU, Kyiv School of Economics, and you cannot win international competition if you have these scattered small universities. You have to find something in between. You must have one big university, but not too big, not too small, and I think it's not such a this idea is helpful. I think if you put it in the way I frame it, it's something that we can actually do.
And how does this resonate with, the attitudes of funding organizations? I mean, you've mentioned already that you've already talks with them, but how does this resonate with their ideas? I mean, do you match here your expectations with the expectations of potential funding authorities, or how would you?
Well, yes and no. I think yes, in terms of there is definitely willingness to support Ukraine, spend money in Ukraine. There is definitely willingness to support short-term contracts like postdocs. There is willingness to build centers of excellence. But the idea of going further and build a huge university is something complicated. And it's complicated for two reasons. One is security, which I mentioned. And the second is trust and quality assurance. So basically, if you talk to mathematicians, chemists, biologists, they would be critical. They would say that Ukrainian academy is not as strong as, according to our standards, and social science is not as strong according to our standards. So why should we trust you to build this best university during the war? So it's a matter of trust. I think, again, you can find cases in history when certain departments or certain groups were created and evolved in, many different countries in Asia, in Eastern Europe. So you can build on that once you have the trust of these people. So I don't think we are yet there. There is not perfect alignment between us, but I think given the evolution for the past 2 years, I mean, I'm so positive. I'm already happy for the evolution which is happening now. So I'm willing to wait for the next 5 years for the next step.
And maybe my last question basically moves us a little bit to another level. I would like to talk a little bit more about the link to the Ukraine plan, and how do you assess the Ukraine plan when it comes to helping Ukrainian science and education? Do you think it sets the right priorities, or would you have preferred different priorities? I would really be interested in hearing your assessment.
Yeah, well, maybe something that I can say, they might sound a bit provocative, but why not? Why not? This is podcast. So actually I have positive assessment. And I know that many people in Ukraine would criticize the plan because it doesn't have very clear statement on priority on certain sectors. Like there is no clear statement that science is important or education is important. And there was no clear statement that culture is important, but there are many smart people in Ukraine who would say that culture and the science are the most important things. So why is it the case that we cannot see it in the plan? But I believe that that's not how plan works. Plans work on this big scale between big governments during the war. I think you don't write the word science with huge capital letters in the plan. The plan has a lot of, small bullet points regarding capacity building, recovery, support of budgets. And this is the way how you get access to finance. You just have to understand this, this language and this bureaucracy, and you apply and you lobby and you compete for the money within these bullet points that are scattered across the plan. So the money are there. It just, you have to understand how it works. And I think it just, in Ukraine, we lack this culture of understanding how it works. But, it's possible. You can figure it out. Yeah, and I also think that it's a very big political thing, even to create this plan, to shake hands, to agree that we will spend money on Ukraine now. It's such a big deal that a compromise is very important. Any small noise, anything that could have delayed this plan during the war would be terrible. So basically what I'm trying to say that even if I'm a scholar, I'm a researcher, it is in my interest to lobby science and research, but I would shut up and I would say, thank you for this 50 billion euro. We are very happy to have this plan during the war. So we will figure it out. So I think it's a huge step, and I would not undermine it with, with competition between Ukrainian agencies who lobby their own interests, whether it's science, education, culture, medicine. Everything is important, but to win the war is the priority. And we have to rely on international partners. Right now, everything that Ukraine, if you think about Ukrainian budget, whatever we produce in Ukraine in terms of budget, the taxes, money that come from Ukraine, we spend it on war because that's the only way. And everything else, like, we also have to spend money on social benefits, on salaries of our teachers, doctors. All this money, they come from international aid. So their value international aid right now is so important that I would never dare to undermine the process of negotiation. Yeah, I would be very happy. I'm happy with so that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tymofii, for sharing your insights here with us in our podcast, Roundtable Osteuropa. We will continue the discussion now in the Q&A with the audience. But when it comes to the audience listening to us now, thank you so much for your interest. And we will continue our conversation in either in the format of a podcast or in different formats. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's an honor.